Hello, everyone. So about a month ago, I had nothing better to do with my time but to go see that new Craven movie back when it was in theaters, and it got me thinking, as all things do, about late-stage capitalism. The Sony Corporation, or as I like to call it, the last thing you see before you die, has hit us with 6 movies in as many years about a bunch of random Spider-Man villains without Spider-Man. Some genius thought it would be a good idea to take from the massive rogues gallery of Spider-Man's enemies, position them as the main characters, and make them good guys. And today, we're gonna talk about why that happened, what we can do about it, and what Sony has to show for it 6 years down the line. Today, I present to you every single Spider-Man-less Spider-Man spin-off reviewed Part 1. This means I will only be talking about the live-action Sonyverse, not any of the Spider-Verse films or, like, the Tom Holland movies, in case that wasn't clear. Now, back in the 90s, when Sony bought the film rights for Spider-Man for a measly $7 million, there was a little stipulation put into their contract saying that in order to keep those rights, they would need to make at least one Spider-Man-related project every 5 years and 9 months, with a general rule being that production for the next Spider-Man thing needed to begin within 3 years and 9 months after the last project came out. In short, Spider-Man proved to be a very lucrative IP for Sony after the success of Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film back in 2002, and so the race was on to make sure that there was always something Spider-Man coming out. Spider-Man 3 released in 2007, and plans were for Raimi to continue the Tobey Maguire films for at least 2 more movies, but due to a bunch of behind-the-scenes stuff, Spider-Man 4 got canned, and Sony had to reboot the entire thing and start from scratch with the Andrew Garfield movies. If you want to play a drinking game, take a shot every time I say the word Spider-Man in this video. If you ever wondered why there never seems to be more than a few years between the end of one Spider-Man franchise and the beginning of the next, that's why. Sony was trying to build a cinematic universe out of the TASM films, but then those ended up being massive commercial and critical bombs. And at the time, Marvel was just jonesing to have one of their most popular superheroes debut in the MCU, and so a deal was struck. Within just 3 years after the release of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, there was already another Spider-Man movie with a different face and a fresh new coat of paint called Spider-Man Homecoming, and on the cycle goes. But all that is necessary to understand when it comes to the Venomverse, as some people like to call it, because it seemingly helps to explain why these movies exist at all. And I say seemingly because, it really doesn't if you stop to think about it. Like, okay, yes, Sony needs to put out a new Spider-Man movie every 5 years, sure, but they're already doing that. The Tom Holland films may be in the MCU, but they're still very much Sony productions. There's no reason that I'm aware of why those wouldn't count towards Sony keeping their end of the contract. And like I said, Homecoming was only released 3 years after TASM 2, and it's had sequels that each released 2 years after their predecessors, the last of which having only come out 3 years ago, so there's still time to follow that up. But even if there was some reason why the Holland films don't count, there's also the Spider-Verse movies. One came out in 2018, which was 4 years after TASM 2, the sequel released less than 5 years later in summer 2023, and Beyond the Spider-Verse is still being worked on, but I seriously doubt it'll release later than 2028, so they're more than covered on that front for the time being. The thing is, I know there were plans from Sony to make a Venom movie as far back as the early 2010s, and they were setting up that and a whole bunch of other spin-offs at the end of TASM 2 that'll hilariously never see the light of day now. So I kinda get why they maybe still wanted to go through with that. But you'd think after the first or second Venom movie not being the most critically beloved things, Sony might have gotten the message. You definitely think they would have taken the hint after the disastrous box office failure of Morbius and the memes that were spawned from that, but apparently not. Either way, seeing as I'm not really accepting the excuse that Sony made these movies because they had to, I'm frankly baffled that they created 6 of these goddamn films before having enough self-awareness to take a step back and rethink their strategy. After the failure of Craven, the Sony CEO has made a lot of really funny statements about the nature of these films and how they intend to proceed with them going forward, but I really wouldn't hold my breath for Venom 4, even if they are leaving that open as a possibility. No, I don't expect them to continue this universe, or at least not in the same capacity it's been going in for 6 years, which is partially why I felt now was an appropriate time to take a look back and assess the damage. Now, this rule that they needed to make at least one Spider-Man film every 5 years is real and something I could actually find a source for, but there's also another thing I've heard about these movies that that was, until recently, widely accepted to be the case that's also meant to explain why they are the way that they are. Now, it recently came out that this was just never true, but for a long time, fans believed that as long as Spider-Man was running around in the MCU, Sony wasn't allowed to put him in any of their movies, and that's why he's barely even referenced and never actually appears in them. This is something that I myself bought into, but I always question the logic of it, considering, again, the Spider-Verse films exist, and featuring Spider-Man in them is kind of their whole thing. But that also didn't make sense to me considering early promotional material for Morbius clearly featured references to Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. I have no idea what this movie was originally going to look like, but it's pretty clear that whatever it used to be, it got reworked to hell and back to make it what it is today. But the bottom line here is that there was absolutely nothing preventing Sony from putting Spider-Man in any one of these movies, and for some reason that I'll never understand, they chose not to. It can't be that they were afraid general audiences would get confused by two Spider-Men running around in different cinematic universes at the same time if the Spider-Verse films exist. Not only does Spider-Man obviously appear a lot in those movies, but it also introduces the concept of the Spider-Verse to more casual moviegoers. And it came out the same year as Venom. Venom literally had a post-credit scene dedicated to advertising that movie. So any audience member who somehow wouldn't have understood how two Spider-Men were active on the big screen simultaneously isn't going to be any less confused with the versions we actually got. And I don't even accept that that's the reason they didn't want to do it anyway, because the post-credit scenes for Venom 2 and Morbius both only make sense to you if you understand the multiverse concept and are familiar with No Way Home. And even then it doesn't really make sense, but we'll get into all that. And No Way Home literally features all three mainline Peter Parkers teaming up together to fight various bad guys from the previous Spider-Man movies. You want to talk about jumping the shark on this whole concept? Well, that happened a long fucking time ago, alright? We're well past that now. So, suffice it to say, I don't really get why Spider-Man doesn't appear in these movies. Like, sure, make Venom the main character, title the movie after him, whatever. But that doesn't mean you can't commit to him being a supervillain and making him a foil to that universe's Spider-Man. I'll hold off for now because I literally go further in depth on this line of thinking in my review of the actual film, but yeah, it was just a weird choice. And one last thing before we get started, here's the way we're gonna do this. This and the next video are gonna cover the 3 Venom movies, as well as Morbius, Madam Web, and Kraven. I'm splitting this into 2 parts with 3 movies apiece for the sake of my own sanity, and I would do them in release order, but then that would mean I have to separate the Venoms into different videos, and something about that just fucks with my OCD. So in this video, we're tackling the Venom trilogy, and the next part will be all about the other stuff. Got it? Good, let's go.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do.
Venom 1 is interesting because it is really bad, but I also think a lot of people are kind of unfair to this one. I see criticisms of it that are just not accurate, like people saying it's only funny when it's not trying to be. I know comedy is subjective, but I don't know, there are a lot of jokes in this movie that just work.
Hey, Jesus! This is dead.
It has all the problems you would expect given what movie this is, but it's also probably far and away the best one on this list, which I know isn't really saying much, but still. With that said though, there's only so much I can really praise about this film. The script is a mess, the acting is all over the place, and the directing is super generic in most places. Let's get into it. To start off, I kinda wanted to take a step back for a second and talk a little bit more about the meta of these films, because this was the first of them, so it kinda set the stage for what to expect. Now, like I said, it made enough sense that they wanted to make spin-offs about certain popular Spider-Man villains like Venom, but that's just the thing. They're Spider-Man villains. When this film was being marketed, it looked like they were just straight up going for a more anti-hero vibe. Yeah, Venom will bite a guy's head off, but he and Eddie are still ultimately trying to save the world. Plus, it's PG-13, so we're not even gonna make it look that violent. No blood. Because that's what happens when you get fucking decapitated. Now, as someone who's always defended the concept that an adaptation is allowed to deviate from the source material and do its own thing, I'm not inherently against the idea that Eddie and Venom are the good guys, or at least not evil. But I will say that when I think about a series of spin-offs centered around Spider-Man villains, if we're dead set on not having Spider-Man in them at all for some reason, then the much more interesting idea would be to actually commit to making them villains, you know? Actually show them going around doing bad things and showcase what this world would look like with these villains running around and there's no Spider-Man to stop them. Make it clear why Spider-Man is so important and that what he does actually matters at the end of the day. But, you know, whatever, it's obviously not what they did, so as I said, Eddie is a good guy. In fact, he's a really good person, and it's seriously to his detriment in this film. We're introduced to Eddie Brock in the following ways. He's shown to be a relatively famous reporter who goes around uncovering the truth and toppling injustice, gaining himself a reputation as this trustworthy and honest Robin Hood type. His moral integrity is so strong that even when his boss and his girlfriend tell him not to go after Carlton Drake and advise him to do a simple puff piece on the guy, he doesn't listen to them. People are critical of this decision because it honestly comes across like he just didn't think the situation through. Like, what did he think was going to happen by confronting the guy on camera about all the allegations being made against him? Obviously, there's going to be backlash, Eddie. But Eddie's also characterized as someone who doesn't think things like this all the way through. And he's not entirely concerned with whatever consequences might come from him doing what he perceives to be the right thing. I'd even push back against the notion that he expected anything different, but that doesn't mean he's going to back down from challenging an unethical business mogul. I'm being completely unironic here when I say that this is pretty good character writing. It establishes that Eddie is a deeply moral person who will never betray his integrity, come whatever. And that's reinforced in other scenes, like when he gives $20 to a homeless woman in exchange for a newspaper that's free. He didn't have to pay her anything for that paper. It wasn't hers to rightfully sell, but he did it anyway, using it as a pretense to simply give her money without making her feel bad about her situation, which actually takes some pretty strong emotional intelligence. And I'd like to stress that this is at a point where Eddie has been out of a job for 6 months, currently is looking for work, and is living in San Francisco, one of the most expensive places one could live in the United States. Now, the film does itself no favors by making this look like a fairly decent apartment he's living in. Dude's probably dropping at least $4,000 a month on this place. But the implication we're given from all this is that Eddie isn't doing too hot financially. $20 is not an insignificant amount of money for someone in his situation, and yet he gives it freely to someone who's even less well off than he is. I say all this to stress just how good of a person Eddie is shown to be, because I want to highlight something interesting about this whole situation that the movie itself doesn't even really seem to pick up on. I mentioned in my little diatribe that Eddie going after Carlton Drake cost him everything. This includes his girlfriend Anne, because she apparently works at a law firm which represents Drake and his company, the Life Foundation, and him going after Drake cost her job as well. This is apparently only a minor setback for her, as we see that she's doing pretty well for herself and her career 6 months later, but still. In the moment, she was not happy with Eddie about what he did, and she dumped him. Throughout the rest of the movie, theirs is this really awkward relationship where he wants her back, but she's with someone else now, and barely wants anything to do with him, let alone to try to rekindle any kind of romantic partnership. So Eddie has to come to terms with the fact that he's not getting her back and he needs to move on. But here's the thing. The specific reason why Eddie doing what he did cost Anne her job was the fact that he was going off of information he stole from Anne's emails regarding some really nefarious shit her firm was defending Drake from. She was in the loop about all the allegations concerning discount Elon Musk, and yet she apparently didn't have the same amount of integrity as her fuck-up of a boyfriend. I understand that there are obviously laws protecting client confidentiality with their legal representation. It's not exactly like Anne could have done anything against Drake with the information she had on hand, even if she wanted to. But the problem is that she apparently doesn't want to. If Anne was as good of a person as this movie wants to make her out to be, she wouldn't continue working for a firm that represents someone like this, especially not if it means having to help him cover up murder allegations. Okay, editing Sheev jumping in here real quick just to make one big clarification that I know I'm gonna need to make, because otherwise I know I'm gonna get strawman to hell and back in the comments. If I've learned anything from my Tuscan Raider video, it's that some of you guys, you need to have everything spelled out for you. I am not saying that any lawyer who knowingly defends someone guilty of a crime is a bad person. They're just doing their job, and everyone deserves to have their day in court, no matter what they did. But there's a difference between some guy with little resources at his disposal being given fair representation in the justice system, and a powerful businessman with teams of attorneys at his back who can afford to lose one lawyer. If she's really committed to doing the right thing, then she wouldn't work for this guy. That's all I'm saying. Throughout the rest of the movie, anytime it comes to trying to do the right thing and stop Drake, she's completely down. But that's not because she went on some kind of arc where she realized sometimes you just have to take a stand, even if it's not always convenient. The film seems to just assume she's a good moral person and ignores entirely that she has these faults. Frankly, I'd say Eddie dodged a bullet here, and honestly, I'm not exactly sure why he wouldn't also see it that way, given his previously established convictions. If his whole thing is going after people like Drake to the point where he's unwilling to treat him with kid gloves despite everyone in his life telling him to do exactly that, that, then you'd think he'd have more of a problem with his girlfriend when he finds these emails. The only way I could really square this is that he's simply blinded by his affection for her, but if that's the case, I would expect his arc in relation to Anne to be one where he realizes she was never the one for him and that he doesn't need to try and change for her instead of the one he actually goes on in this film. But then again, Eddie's stalwart devotion to morality isn't always consistent in this film. Take his dynamic with Venom, which I honestly can't make heads or tails of. The stuff they do with Venom is very strange. See, the film showcases that Venom can basically just take control of Eddie's body, and Eddie can't really do anything to stop him, short of getting him close to a really loud noise that causes him to go goblin mode. If he wanted to, he could basically just go around killing anyone without a second thought, and Eddie would be his unwilling accomplice. He even basically tells Eddie that's what he intends to do, but that's not what ends up happening. Apparently, Venom likes Eddie, so when Eddie raises moral objections to things like biting off people's heads and stuff, he actually kind of listens. We don't really get much on why Venom cares what Eddie thinks. The best I can say is I guess he sees him as kind of a kindred spirit of sorts. I don't think that's enough for him to go from, I'm here to do what I want when I want and you can't stop me, to, you know what, I actually kind of like it here. The captivating beauty of God's creation has changed my perspective.
It is peaceful up here. Your world is not so ugly after all.
But in any case, I don't really think it's within character for Eddie to be okay with Venom killing people. Not even bad guys like the guy holding up Mrs. Chen's store. The only excuse I can really come up with here is that toward the end of the film, Venom basically threatens to seriously hurt Eddie if he doesn't find him someone to snack on quickly.
But can we get something to eat now? Otherwise, your liver, it's starting to look really, really good. And juicy.
But assuming that wasn't just meant to be taken as a joke, that line would seriously recontextualize the relationship between these two characters in a way that I don't really think this movie intends. At this point, this is an abusive hostage situation where Eddie has to serve people up on a platter to this scary monster parasite, or else he's in danger of being fucking killed. Am I meant to take it as a happy ending then, when it's revealed Venom is alive and back with Eddie after his big sacrifice moment in the final battle? We're gonna get to all that bullshit later, by the way. And even if I were to accept that Eddie's okay with killing bad guys, there's still moments like him not seeming to give a shit about Venom massacring a bunch of police officers until the very end of the fight.
No, we do not eat policemen!
Dude, where the fuck have you been? You should have said that shit 5 minutes ago! Again, you could have easily stuck to the source material and made this a true, honest-to-God villain origin story, but you had to go and make Eddie an extremely good person, so moments like these really tend to stand out. This could have been about the symbiote taking a man down on his luck for trying to do the right thing and using that to corrupt him into a jaded, cynical villain, but that's not what we got. Eddie is a good guy with inconsistent morals. Venom is barely a character, and I almost feel like it would be a fundamental insult to storytelling as a craft to call what he goes on an arc, and their relationship is strange, confusing, and possibly even abusive, which isn't great given that they're the main characters and their dynamic is meant to be the primary focus of all three of these films, but whatever. The movie also tells us that their connection is literally killing Eddie, so there's another reason why Venom is bad for him. But then again, the later movies just kind of pretend like that wasn't a thing ever established, and the end of this movie sorta does the same thing. They really want to act like this was a happy ending where Venom and Eddie are back together and starting to figure things out with each other, but I'm sorry, there's just too much going against the idea that theirs is a good relationship, and that's without even getting into the fact that Venom shouldn't even be alive at this point. So throughout the movie, the two main weaknesses established for the symbiotes are fire and loud noises.
What, so sound is like his kryptonite?
Not all sounds.
And fire.
Fire and fire.
Which is consistent with other Spider-Man media, but not with itself, as there are several moments in this movie where Venom is hit with these things and it doesn't affect him at all. An airplane flying comically close to the top of this building Venom's perched on causes him to lose his shit and nearly drop Eddie to his death. Well, I'm definitely gonna remember that little tidbit later on when Venom is hanging onto the side of a rocket. This moment is meant to depict Venom defeating Riot by causing the rocket he's in to explode, because, again, fire kills symbiotes. Yet when Venom himself is engulfed in the same fire, apparently he's able to just walk that shit off. The scene is treated like some heroic sacrifice on Venom's part, but then in the next scene, he's just apparently back and it's never explained. Somehow Venom returned. Eddie also survives this moment, which is interesting since he fell from a pretty tremendous height and didn't have a symbiote to protect him. So really, we just have plot armor all around today, don't we? If you're one of the main protagonists, you get to survive shit that the villains who literally have the same powers and weaknesses as you get killed by. I'm sure that won't do anything to damage the stakes. And the plot of this movie is just riddled with stupid shit like this. Something I'd like to call your attention to is the very arbitrary nature of humans bonding with symbiotes, and the convenience regarding how many of our main characters are able to do it. Because the film goes out of its way to show that compatibility with a symbiote is extremely rare, and will spell a gruesome death to anyone who's not able to bond with one. It seems that the symbiotes themselves are able to tell who they can and can't bond with just by looking at them, seeing as both Venom and Riot do so multiple times, and that makes enough sense considering parasites would need to know the difference for the sake of their own survival. But as far as the humans are concerned, they're kinda just taking wild stabs in the dark and hoping for the best. And this is important for establishing just how unlikely you are to be compatible at all, let alone an especially good host like Eddie is said to be.
You are far too good of a match to throw away so soon.
And I'm gonna shift focus here for a second to talk about inciting incidents, because I think that's important to this discussion. A point of contention that I have with this movie is that Eddie just so happens to be such a good host for Venom. And I feel like a lot of people who just heard me say that might immediately jump to the defense that, of course he would be. That's why we're following him. The film is called Venom, and it's based off a character in the comics named Eddie Brock who bonds with the symbiote. The only reason Eddie is the main character of this story is because he can bond with Venom. It'd be like criticizing that of all the people the spider could have bitten, it just happened to be Peter Parker. But I'd argue there's a difference here. In any typical Spider-Man movie or show, Peter is not an active participant in the story beforehand. He becomes involved because he got spider powers and decided to use them for the greater good, but that's not the case with Eddie. He was only where he needed to be to bond with Venom because he was already investigating Carlton Drake and was seemingly the only person who could do anything to stop him, at least as far as the film wants you to believe. So where some might say the inciting incident of this story is that Eddie bonds with Venom, I'd argue that's not the case. If anything, the inciting incident is the fact that a bunch of astronauts found these creatures floating around in a comet. This was astronomically unlikely, but that's okay, because we usually let those kinds of contrivances pass when it comes to inciting incidents. If they didn't happen, the story just wouldn't exist for us to analyze. So no, I don't criticize Peter getting bitten by the spider, because that is the inciting incident in the story of Spider-Man. But in the case of this movie, Eddie was already trying to take down Drake and was then handed what's basically the ultimate trump card in defeating him. Or at least it would have been had it not turned out that Drake can also support a symbiote and happen to get possessed by Riot right as all the stuff with Eddie and Venom was going down. I know it's a meme now, but I still also think it's a valid criticism that it took Riot 6 months to get from Malaysia to San Francisco, when it's not like he had to fucking swim all that way or something. He just took an airplane. We see him at the airport. At first I thought maybe he spent those months trying to learn everything he could about Earth, but then the film decided to go and tell me that the symbiotes are able to access all of their host's memories as soon as they bond with them.
We need Carlton Drake's rocket.
How do you even know about that?
I know everything, Eddie.
You do?
Everything about you.
How?
I am inside your head.
Or some of the time, anyway.
Who is Anne?
It's not always consistent. In any case, I can't think of a single reason why it took Riot as long as it did to get back to Drake. And if he hadn't waited half a fucking year to enact his plans, he would have just taken the rocket and left, and there would have been nobody to stop him. And then we have Anne. Now, aside from the fact alone that it's just a huge coincidence these two both happen to be compatible hosts for Venom, because seriously, what are the fucking odds of that? Her being able to do this is also fairly significant to the plot. When she and Venom get back to Eddie, they arrive just in time to rescue him from being fucking executed. So if she hadn't been compatible and Venom had had to take more time to look for a viable host, Eddie would be dead, and they wouldn't have been able to have their little moment in this distractingly obvious forest soundstage with artificial lighting to make it look like it's dark and they're outside. And then she wouldn't have been nearby during the final battle so that she could help out. If Venom had just grabbed any random Joe at the hospital, I doubt they would have been willing to help Eddie fight a fucking supervillain. And by the way, I should mention how it is Venom ever even got out of containment, shouldn't I? Because what happens is extremely funny. So, one of the scientists working for Drake grows a conscience and decides to do something about all the murdering they're doing, imploring Eddie to sneak into the lab and take some photos of all the homeless people they've been collecting off the streets and hand them over to his former boss. And remember earlier when I said Eddie gave money to a homeless person? Well, you're not gonna believe who he's about to run into. I don't think I need to stress how big San Francisco is and how many homeless people there there are in it, but lucky for the plot that the one homeless person Eddie happens to know is here, because otherwise the events that follow probably wouldn't have happened. She gets his attention and asks him to let her out, then he starts kind of fumbling with the screen next to the door, the alarm starts going off, and then Eddie fucking grabs a fire extinguisher and starts smashing at the glass. You might say Eddie probably still would have tried to help these homeless people anyway, even if he didn't know one of them personally, but I'd like to remind you guys that he walked past the cells of several other people and it didn't seem like he was about to lift a finger to try to set any of them free. And whatever, like that's fine, it makes a lot more sense to take the pictures and get the police involved, but this leads me to believe that the only reason he tried to set this particular person free is because they know each other, which seems to be why she asked for his help at all. And that means Venom never gets free, Eddie never gets the symbiote, and who knows what else might have happened from there. The movie would play out completely differently. Plus, I have to wonder what kind of security this place is working with. This is a top secret facility doing illegal experiments on human guinea pigs, so surely a famous ex-reporter who specialized in bringing down people exactly like Carlton Drake isn't about to just walk into the place because one of the employees let him in, right? There aren't security cameras, at least in the outside lobby areas where regular people might come and go during the day. I ask because okay, later on, after Eddie gets away, Jenny Slate gets arrested by Drake's guys after they apparently discover that she was the one who helped him get in. How did they find that out? Well, the film never tells us, so my initial assumption was that she was caught doing so by the cameras. That would have made her seem really stupid, but it's the only explanation that made any sense. But then Drake starts asking her who it was that she let into the facility, which means they don't know it was Eddie until she tells them and then dies like a fucking moron. So I guess there weren't any cameras. They know who Eddie Brock is. They know what he looks like. If there were security cameras, then they wouldn't be wasting their time asking Mona Lisa who it was. So I have no idea how any of this happened. I have no idea how Eddie got away from the lab after bonding with Venom. He kind of just climbs a tree, and apparently these guys aren't able to figure out where he went. I don't know. And I have no idea what to make of any of the bullshit surrounding their subsequent chase of Eddie later on in the film. Once Eddie gets the symbiote and the real plot kicks in, the movie seriously goes off the rails, and that's a shame, because I do actually think there was some stuff worth appreciating in the first act. In the spirit of that, I'd now like to talk about Carlton Drake, played by the incredibly talented Riz Ahmed. Similarly to Eddie, there are actually a few bits of characterization he gets at the beginning of the film that I think are kind of nice, but for the most part, he's pretty much a nothing burger throughout. Like, he kind of spouts pseudo-philosophical jargon and tries to make himself sound deeper than he actually is, but there doesn't seem to be anything more than that. If the film were going for any form of nuance, there's an angle they could have potentially played about how, despite doing some really unethical shit to earn himself the rank of bad guy, his intentions are actually somewhat noble. I mean, they do say he rose to the top because of his groundbreaking work in things like cancer treatment at a young age, and the reason he's been studying the symbiotes at all is because he recognizes unfixable problems like climate change for what they are and is trying to save humanity. The path to hell is paved with good intentions, you know, that sort of thing. Now, whether or not these noble intentions come from a genuine place of altruism, or if he simply just wants the glory of being the guy who saved the world, I don't know. That's something you could play around with. But the ultimate point is that he is trying to fix the world's problems, and maybe some parallels could be drawn between him and Eddie regarding how they approach these types of things. Eddie goes straight for the bad guy with no thought about the larger ramifications of his actions, and that screws him in the end. Whereas Drake is trying to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, but the minutia of how he tries to accomplish the greater good is what tarnishes his soul. And I don't know, you'd think if all of Drake's motivations are tied to trying to save humanity from what he sees as their inevitable doom, he might have a thing or two to say about helping Riot get off of Earth so that he can bring down an army of symbiotes to completely ravish his world, right? Maybe not even for selfless reasons. Maybe he just doesn't want to give up all the wealth and power he's secured for himself so that he could hopefully maybe survive the fucking apocalypse and live the rest of his days in a nightmarish hellscape. But other than the very surface level stuff, Drake isn't allowed to be an actual character, so what he thinks of Riot doesn't really matter. He's simply along for the ride the moment the real main villain of this movie remembers he's supposed to be a part of this plot and boards a flight. And that's such a strange choice, right? Like, at least Drake and Eddie have some history. At least they've fucking met at earlier points in the movie by the time of the final confrontation. I know Venom and Riot obviously know each other, but we've never seen them interact at any point, so whatever weight there could have been between the protagonist and antagonist is just kind of not there. We understand the stakes in the abstract, but there aren't any personal stakes for the participants of this battle. You want to know how I'd send off Drake's character? Have him pull some crazy shit at the last minute to expel or otherwise incapacitate Riot and sacrifice himself to blow up the rocket while Venom gets Eddie to safety. That way you actually round out a fleshed out arc for the main fucking villain of the story, while also doing away with Eddie and Venom's impossible survival that I mentioned earlier. But I don't know, if you're looking for a dumb action movie that doesn't care enough to actually write interesting character stuff, then this is probably your cup of tea. It's got a lot of generic, lifeless, paint-by-the-numbers action, plot contrivances out the wazoo, and some occasionally funny comedy. It's the best Venom movie kind of by default, because not only are the next two just leaps and bounds worse in essentially every way, but they also have basically no redeeming qualities. No decent character work or solid setups to trick you into thinking you might be in for an actual movie like this one has, which in a way I guess makes me less mad at them because at least they're honest and upfront about it. But still, this is about the strongest we're gonna get on this list, and I can't seriously say Venom deserves any higher than a 4 out of 10. Also, Woody Harrelson wears an Annie wig.
There's gonna be carnage.
There be carnage.
Venom 2 Let There Be Carnage is a complete fucking dumpster fire from start to finish, and I love every second of it. I wasn't sure where to even begin with this one, so I decided the best place to start would be with some thoughts I had after finishing the last film, the most prominent of which being that I don't understand how Eddie is still a free man after everything that went down in Venom. So let's get a recap here. He breaks into a highly secure lab and steals a specimen from containment, which then causes him to kill or otherwise harm multiple people in and around his apartment. And there are several eyewitnesses to all of this. Eddie's apartment basically gets destroyed and the police are seen as they would be at the scene of the crime. He's then somehow found by a bunch of police officers who've come to arrest Eddie before then massacring all of them. And the film ends with him committing an act of domestic terrorism by blowing up a rocket. It was already really weird at the end of the last one that Eddie didn't go to prison for all those things, but this movie goes ahead and establishes a few new things that make it even worse. Not only is he apparently under federal investigation,
The FBI is still investigating us for all of that stuff that we were involved with.
but we actually get a rundown of everything the police definitively know Eddie had a hand in when he gets arrested later by Detective Mulligan.
Multiple dead bodies at your building last year, and only you at the Life Foundation when that rocket exploded.
So once again, I ask, how is Eddie a free man, exactly? What does the US government know about the aliens that were being experimented on at the Life Foundation, and do they know that Eddie has one? I don't see why they wouldn't. But an even better question that began to arise as I watched this film was, if Eddie is under federal investigation for crimes that would definitively tie him to a terrorist act, why is he being allowed by the authorities to interview one of the most prolific serial killers in history? I understand that Cletus Cassidy requested Eddie specifically, and sure, the police are desperate for any information they can get out of the guy. They want to know where some of the bodies are buried and things of that nature so they can get some closure on a lot of open cases. But I don't know that that's enough for them to let Eddie in the same room as him, even despite their desperation. And Eddie being allowed to interview Cletus is what facilitates the plot of this entire movie, so I'd say that's a big issue. And I mean it when I say that, because the next thing that's about to happen during this interview scene is what makes the whole story possible, and it's really fucking contrived for a multitude of reasons. I'm just gonna have to describe to you guys what happens so you can see what I mean, because it's insane. So, Venom notices a bunch of shit carved into the wall of Cletus's cell, which includes a drawing of a formation of hills and rocks that paint the picture of a particular beach where all the bodies are buried, a place called Rodeo Beach. Venom is then able to perfectly recall this drawing and scribble it down on a piece of paper, and then he types the name of the beach into a search engine, which takes him to what seems to be basically the first Google image result of the place. And in a Rise of Skywalker dagger-esque moment, said image perfectly matches Cletus's drawing. That's the second time in this video that these movies have made me reference the Rise of Skywalker. Let's not make that a habit, guys. So Eddie finds where all the bodies are buried without Cletus's cooperation, which means now that he's no longer of use to the state, the governor of California is compelled to overturn the moratorium on Cletus and sentence him to death. And there's so much wrong with this that I don't even know where to start. I guess first off, I'm just gonna wave away the fact that Venom apparently has a photographic memory and the observational skills to notice things all around Eddie that Eddie wouldn't even think to pick up on. He's a super advanced alien, like, whatever, I guess. But okay, so This image of Rodeo Beach. We've got a chicken and the egg situation here. I'm not really sure which came first. Did Cletus draw the place where the bodies were buried based on that Google image result? Or did whoever took this photo just happen to line up the hills and rocks exactly with the drawing on Cletus's wall? And more importantly, just because Venom is able to recreate this drawing of some vague outlines, that shouldn't even begin to tell him where to actually look. How does he know which beach this is even a depiction of? Was Eddie randomly looking at images of Rodeo Beach at some point while Venom was snooping? Why? Maybe Eddie's been to that beach at some point and Venom was able to access that memory? Though even if he has, unless he was sitting in that exact spot, I don't know how Venom would have been able to put that together. And even if he did, that still relies on the Google image exactly matching that on Cletus's cell wall. So either way, we're dealing with a heap of contrivances 10 miles high. And that's not even the half of it. The fun never stops. So the next thing that happens is that, like I said, Cletus Cassidy is now on death row, and Eddie decides to go pay him a visit, get his last words on record, that sort of thing. This scene almost threatens to actually be kind of interesting, as Cletus is trying to draw parallels between himself and Eddie and just really push his buttons by bringing up all sorts of things that haunt him and that he considers mistakes or failures on his part. Some things that we never even learned about Eddie until now, like the fact that apparently he killed his own mother in childbirth and was then resented by his father growing up. But basically every other line, Venom keeps interjecting with dumb shit and ruining the moment, and this is only done to facilitate this moment.
You son of a bitch!
Where Venom apparently gets upset on behalf of Eddie and starts attacking Cletus. My best faith interpretation of this reaction is that Venom and Eddie are so intrinsically bonded at this point that they're able to feel each other's emotions, and so the things that are upsetting Eddie are also upsetting Venom, only Eddie is a lot better about not acting on those emotions in rash ways. That's the only way I can make sense of why Venom would attack Cletus, since I don't see why he'd be upset about Eddie's mom dying. In any case, though, this needed to happen so that Cletus could bite Eddie.
Eddie?
I fucking love this reaction. I laugh at it every time. He realizes that Eddie's blood is not fucking normal, and this telegraphs to us, the audience, that Cletus now has alien blood in his system, which gets mutated when the executioners inject him with chemicals. Apparently mixing these specific chemicals with the blood bonded with a symbiote is enough to create a brand new one. How neat. So to get a head count here, not only do all the contrivances we went over earlier to do with them finding the beach have to happen to even get us to Cletus being executed, but then when that does happen, in order for Carnage to be born and therefore the main conflict of the story to even happen, Eddie then has to go visit Cletus on his last day. Venom has to get provoked enough to attack him so Cletus can bite Eddie, and then that alien blood has to be in his system and mix with the exact right chemicals to apparently create a new symbiote. Did I get all that right? There's only so many ways I can keep saying contrivance at this point. It's like they wanted Carnage to be the main villain of this story and intentionally chose the most roundabout and convoluted way of making that happen as a personal exercise in pissing me off specifically. But you want to talk about coincidence? This movie also introduces us to the fact that superpowers exist in this world independently from the symbiotes and have for some time. Cletus's girlfriend from way back when they were locked in the same asylum together has Black Canary powers and has spent the last 20 years in some kind of facility made specifically to house people like her. I wonder what these people had to say about the symbiotes, or if they're in any way related to what the government plans to do with Eddie once they, get around to actually arresting him. That's just an afterthought I had, though, since this movie never bothers telling us who these people are. My main point here is that of all the people to get superpowers and escape his execution, it just so happens to be the guy who dated a superpowered being decades ago, and said superpowered being happens to have one of the most anti-symbiote abilities you could possibly ask for. Hell, we can take this a step further if we want to. Since it's already a heaping truckload of contrivances that Cletus got these powers at all, we can also call it convenient that the reason Eddie specifically was asked to interview Cletus is because he's the one who wrote about Cletus back in the day, so Cletus has a personal grudge against him. If it had been any other reporter, then even if Cletus ever did get close enough to bite them right before his execution, that wouldn't have done anything. So now we can throw all our previous criticisms onto the pyre about how convenient it is that Eddie just so happened to be compatible with Venom. I can do this all day. This movie broke me. Something I probably should mention, though, since we just talked a bit ago about inciting incidents incidents is that I suppose you could maybe try to counter most of my criticisms of these contrivances with the fact that it all facilitates the story happening in any capacity. Therefore, all these little things have to go right, or else there just wouldn't be a story. But I think there's a difference when it comes to sequels, where they just don't have the same luxury as the first film might. Yeah, sequels obviously can have inciting incidents too, but they're also continuing an ongoing story just by their very nature of being a continuation of the first installment, meaning they have to adhere to the rules of cause and effect, or the stakes are broken. I wouldn't be nearly as critical of all this if it weren't for the fact that this is supposed to be part of a larger story, but all these things are a little too convenient for my liking. So anyway, the opening scene is a flashback to 1996, where Shriek very clunkily exposits that her powers are getting stronger and she's being taken away to a place called Ravencroft, before the guards then forcibly drag her out of her cell and Cletus screams that they can't take her away from him. Now, this is very important because the dialogue in this scene clearly indicates that these people know she has superpowers, and that that's in fact why she's being transferred, and there doesn't seem to be any reason why they wouldn't know what that power is, and yet they do nothing to restrain her from using them. I'm not sure if they're able to block the sound waves from coming out of her mouth with like a muzzle or something, but even if not, just sedate her. Because there are no measures in place to prevent her from using them, you're not going to believe what happens next. She uses them. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, it's crazy. She doesn't get away, though. Instead, she and the officer kind of fumble for the gun, it goes off, and the film does its best to convince you that she got shot in the eye, despite it not looking like the gun was even pointed at her until it cuts to the next shot where it's mysteriously in a completely different position. Oh, look at that. So she wakes up in Joe Goldberg's cell and spends the next 20 years living in this place. And there's this lady who works at the facility who just really doesn't like her for some reason, and takes basically every opportunity to taunt her anytime something bad is happening to her.
Her old boyfriend's finally getting what he deserves, and the world will be a safer place without him.
Don't know what that's about. Maybe she's a racist. But in any case, now that Cletus is out of prison, it's gonna be really difficult to find her, right? I mean, this is some kind of like government black site. You know, surely it's gonna take a while to investigate and...
Got any of those internets? You're alive?
I don't even know where to begin. You know, if this movie is really just gonna jump the shark and say that symbiotes can stick their little tendrils into USB ports and just learn whatever they seem to be thinking about, why couldn't they have just had that be how Venom figured out the name of the beach? I'm not saying that would have made it any better. I don't see any reason why two different stupid things needed to happen. But seriously, what the fuck am I watching right now? Who wrote this? And why do they insist on calling it a script? So far, there hasn't been a single point of plot progression built on even the concept of cause and effect, and we still haven't even talked about the two main characters yet. As a related point, though, I'm gonna once again raise the question of why the symbiotes have any reason to do what their hosts want, rather than just take control and do as they please. Because see, when I was watching this movie with Jolly and Southpaw, we weren't sure just how much of Carnage was actually just an extension of Cletus Cassidy. The nature of his creation was obviously very different from that of a regular symbiote, so for all we knew, he was basically just the same person as Cletus. Anything Cletus wants, anything Cletus values is all the same stuff as Carnage. The film would then go on, however, to tell us that that's not the case, and we'll get into that later. So now I'm just confused. When they get out of prison, the first thing Carnage wants to do is find and kill Venom. I guess because he perceives him as the only person who poses any real threat to himself, and it makes sense to want to knock him off the board before making any real play for world domination, or whatever his ultimate endgame might be. But Cletus wants to find his girlfriend, and insists on making that the priority for some reason, even though it's not like she's going anywhere. And Carnage apparently is just cool with taking a backseat and letting Cletus decide where they go first. At least with Venom, there's the vague understanding that he apparently likes Eddie and values his approval, but I don't really see why that'd be the case for Carnage. And even if he is willing to play along for the time being, I definitely don't believe he would allow Shriek to live the second he finds out about her power. He makes a comment that she needs to never use it again or he'll kill her.
She does that again, I'll eat her face.
But I mean, A, I don't really know what Carnage expects here. Does he think she's just gonna spend the rest of her life with Cletus and never use her powers? And B, I don't believe that this line wouldn't have generated more conflict between him and Cletus in that moment. Like, you'd think if they're gonna go out of their way to establish that the woman he's in love with is basically the one person in the whole world who can really hurt him, they might actually do something with that, right? Make him have to choose one or the other, and maybe commit to just how much of a psychopath he is if he decides to dump or even kill her if it's the only way Carnage will stay with him. Have it be that he chose power over love, because when it comes down to it, he really only ever cared about himself. They seem to be playing with the idea that Cletus blames his parental figures for the way he is. They were abusive and mistreated him, and so he killed them. And both the movie and Venom the character seem to recognize this as him making excuses for the shitty choices he made by blaming them on other people. Why not put that to the test by having him be exposed to someone who shows him genuine love, only for him to reject that in favor of greater power? But they don't do anything with that, and surprise, surprise, Carnage tries to fucking kill her, and he's able to completely take control and supersede Cletus's wishes, so I don't know why the fuck he didn't just start with that. I mean, like I said, I don't think he would have even given Shriek a chance to begin with, since the whole reason he's so hellbent on killing Venom is that he doesn't want anyone around who can threaten him in any way. I think if these movies introduced the concept that human hosts can expel their symbiotes, then that would fix a lot of issues here, both with Carnage and Cletus, but also Venom and Eddie. With how rare it is to find a compatible host, which, by the way, this film doubles down on significantly by having Venom leave Eddie and then burn through a bunch of random people trying to find someone else who can hold him, that would force the symbiotes to play ball. But no. And yeah, like I said, this film really shows us just how rare a symbiote bond is supposed to be with all the Eddie Venom drama bullshit they pull. Like, after the first movie, I kinda just assumed maybe compatibility wasn't as rare as I thought, and it only looked that way because the humans trying to figure it out were kinda just walking blindly in the dark. But if even Venom can't find someone else to attach to for more than a few hours at a time in a city as highly populated as San Francisco, then clearly there aren't very many people who make the cut. Remember, it didn't seem like the symbiotes have any trouble identifying someone who can hold them, as we saw in the first movie. So it's not like Venom was just doing guesswork and hoping for the best here. If there had been someone in his vicinity who would have worked for him, he would have found them. And all that's relevant because he ends up bonding with Mrs. Chen. And seeing as she survives all three of these movies, that clearly means she's compatible, and my, that's convenient, isn't it? I mean, is there any named character in these movies who can't fucking support a symbiote? That question will become especially hilarious after the next one, but I just want you guys to keep in mind that Mrs. Chen is compatible. Also, I know this isn't this movie's fault, but Mrs. Chen appears in Across the Spider-Verse, and that scene just reuses footage from this one, and it's really distracting.
Mrs. Chen.
Who's asking?
Excuse me.
What do you want?
I remember thinking her dialogue and acting in that scene were stilted and weird, but I just chalked that up to the fact that Spot obviously wasn't really there, and I figured the actress just wasn't being given proper directing. But turns out that's not the case. Like I said, not this movie's fault, but it does annoy me how much these movies desperately want to connect themselves to the popular and well-liked Spider-Man stuff. But anyway, I'm going to use that really awful segue to finally discuss the two main characters in this movie. And specifically, I want to highlight how this film does a little bit of backtracking in a few major places. For one thing, I've already gone over the strange nature of the relationship between human and symbiote, and how Eddie is apparently cool with Venom eating people as long as they're bad guys. But now we've gone back to Eddie not letting Venom eat anyone under any circumstances, and is hoping to keep him content by feeding him live animals and copious amounts of chocolate. Apparently, chocolate has a chemical produced in the human brain that the symbiotes need to sustain themselves, and that's why Venom likes to eat people's heads. That chemical doesn't exist in various other organs Venom mentions also liking to eat, like lungs, pancreas, liver, but you know, I guess he just likes that stuff, and fair enough, more power to him. We all enjoy having a McDonald's burger every once in a while. You know, who are we to judge Venom for partaking in the occasional spleen now and again? And one of the stated reasons why Eddie doesn't want Venom going around eating people is that he's trying to lay low because of the whole under-investigation from the FBI thing that the film acts like means anything. And that's a fair enough reason, I guess, even if I still think he should be behind bars by now, given everything they apparently already know. But they also reincorporate the moral element as well. Eddie doesn't want it because he's not comfortable killing people at all, not even bad guys, which is a little weird since he didn't seem all that messed up about it at the end of the last one. He's pretty casual for a guy who just bit a guy's head off, actually.
What was that?
Oh, I have a parasite. Name is Chen.
And in fact, this movie establishes that he apparently has some kind of deal with Mrs. Chen where he provides her protection from more people like this guy, which, you know, might involve doing more shit like this, but I guess that hasn't been an issue for him yet. There is also this really funny moment where Venom stops a mugger and then picks him up to eat him, but obviously Eddie protests, and so Venom decides to let him go. But then, the way in which he goes about this is by throwing him really hard at a wall and into a dumpster, which, you know, I'm pretty sure that killed him. Or at least I hope it did for his sake. Jeez. And at that point, I don't know. I think Venom could probably just eat him, right? If the reason why not is Eddie's not comfortable with killing, then I mean, it's kind of too late for that, isn't it? I've basically already said my piece about how much Eddie flip-flops between these positions, so this is the last time I'm gonna hammer the point home. But I just find it strange how none of these movies ever take the time to have him commit in any way. Like, if Venom's gonna keep killing people, and it seems like he has no intention of stopping, then that has to be something Eddie's decided he's comfortable with if this relationship is gonna continue. And about halfway through the film, they have this big falling out and Venom leaves, which, like I said earlier, results in the deaths of countless people as he tries to find another compatible host. I doubt Eddie's unaware of the fact that this happened, so you'd think that might weigh on him somewhat. He was desperate to get Venom back once he found out about Carnage, sure. And actually, when he goes to confront Cletus at the church, he has to basically promise to let Venom eat all the bad people present in order to goad him into fighting. It seems like we're making it pretty clear then that Eddie feels he needs Venom and is willing to compromise on some of his morals in order to have him, right? I mean, I guess that's his arc, since there's never another moment where Eddie gets all pearl clutchy about it. It never happens in Venom 3 or at any point later in this movie, so there we go, I guess. It just seems a bit anticlimactic as an arc, and considering it was born entirely out of desperation to clean up a mess he felt responsible for making, I'm not entirely sure how permanent it's meant to be as a compromise. He needs Venom to defeat Carnage, but at that point, Venom then has no leverage to heighten his own position. So you'd think the resolution to their falling out has to have something to do with the connection they feel for each other. And you might say that's what happens, but honestly, I don't buy it. Were it not for the fact that he was desperate for Venom's help, I don't think he would have ever had the motivation to get him back. And even in the scene where they do reconcile, the framing of it is really weird. This is because of another piece of backtracking that this movie does, which is that Eddie is still in love with Anne. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Sheev, didn't you say that part of Eddie's arc in the last movie was realizing they're not gonna find their way back to each other and being okay with that? Well, yes, I did, because that's what happened. There was that one line where Venom says this.
Look at her. She has no idea we are going to get her back.
No, I don't think so.
But given the way Eddie responds and how this line is framed, it's played more as a joke to showcase how Eddie is emotionally mature enough to understand that he blew it with her and needs to move on like she has. I still take umbrage with the framing that he did anything wrong in the incident that caused their breakup from a moral standpoint, but in any case, I got absolutely no implication from the last film's ending that Eddie was in any way still pining after Anne. Toward the beginning of this film, she invites him out to dinner at a really nice restaurant where they used to go when they were dating to inform him that she's getting married, because she's just the best. And the way Eddie reacts to this is interesting.
And I'm in love with you. It's a lot to process.
And okay, I'm gonna level with him a little bit here. Even if you've accepted the fact that someone you want to be with has no interest in you and you've taken steps to get over them, sometimes it can be really hard to see them moving on and going into new stages of their lives that you haven't reached yet. I have exes that I'm on good terms with and have no interest in pursuing romantically, but it still stung a little bit when I found out they were getting married. That's a completely normal reaction to have in a situation like this, sure. But the way this is being framed is that Eddie still thought he had a genuine chance with Anne despite her being in a committed relationship and is now having that fantasy crushed into a million pieces. And in the scene where Eddie gets back with Venom, he says all sorts of things to him, but all the while Venom is inside Anne, so it's almost like he's actually saying these things to her.
Okay, well, fine. I was a loser before I met you.
Yep, that's right.
And now I am someone. You made me special.
I guess at best you can call it a double meaning where these things are meant for both Anne and for Venom, but still, you just don't get the impression that he wants Venom back for any reason other than the immediate necessity of stopping Carnage. This diatribe was meant for Anne, because for some reason the writers decided Anne needed to be a part of this story. She's still just the complete worst, by the way. In fact, however bad I said she is in the first film, she's even more terrible now. I already said she invited Eddie to one of their old date spots to flaunt an engagement ring in his face, but the scene has the audacity to continue giving her more words to say, and they all make me want to throw a phone book at my fucking screen. She asks Eddie to lie and say he's happy for her so as not to make her feel shitty about, you know, telling the guy who's still in love with her that she's getting married, and then has the fucking gall to get mad at him for lying to her.
If I ask you a question, do you have the ability to tell me the truth? Is Venom with you?
He's dead.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Well, you just don't change, do you? Truth is, you don't love anybody. You can't. Commitment's just not your thing.
And now I'm just confused because, like, afraid of commitment? Huh? What are you talking about? Did they forget the actual conflict that's happening between these two characters? The whole point is that he wants to spend the rest of his life with this woman, and she doesn't reciprocate. I'd say fear of commitment is kind of the exact opposite of the problem. My one and only solace is that this awful woman isn't in Venom 3, so this is the last time we have to see her. They use her as the damsel in distress for the final act of the film because it's just that predictable, but she doesn't die because God hates me. You know who does die, though? All the villain characters. They all die. Venom just kind of bitch slaps Shriek, and she gets Gwen Stacy'd, so she lets out one final scream that causes the symbiotes to tweak out and their hosts to fall to their deaths. Venom saves Eddie through some bullshit, though I'm not sure why he even bothered, since apparently this fall isn't enough to kill you. It breaks a few of Cletus's bones, but that's nothing a symbiote can't heal. However, before Carnage can get back to Cletus and heal him, Venom just kind of picks him up and eats him. And that's the end of Carnage.
He did not taste good.
Yeah, you said it, buddy. I do like this moment, though, where Eddie is, like, actually trying to empathize with Cletus and treat him like a human being, but Cletus is still a sadistic murderer, so Venom just fucking casually kills him.
Fuck this guy!
If these films are gonna staunchly commit themselves to never actually do anything interesting with any of the character drama, then they might as well just be dumb as shit. Plus, this is probably the most appropriate usage of the one F-bomb they're allowed, so yeah, I'm not complaining, you know, whatever. But then the police show up, so all the characters get out of Dodge, because I guess now Eddie is suddenly worried that the authorities have enough evidence to arrest him. He flees to Mexico, and then we get the really famous post-credit scene tying this movie in with the plot of MCU Spider-Man, and boy, I sure can't wait to see how this gets followed up in No Way Home. As per the rules of the spell in that movie, which, who the fuck am I kidding, none of these Sonyverse films give a rat's ass about how the No Way Home spell works, but as per those rules, the only people who get pulled into the MCU by it are those who know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, which may have some of you raising your eyebrows at this, since, you know, Spider-Man isn't in these movies, and as far as we know, he isn't an active participant in this world at all. And even if he is, we're given no reason to believe Eddie knows who he is, so you know, what gives? Well, this scene also has this exchange between Eddie and Venom.
80 billion light years of hive knowledge across universes would explode your tiny little brain.
Right, so apparently there's a symbiote hive mind connecting them across different universes somehow. So I guess Venom knows who Spider-Man is because other versions of Venom do. Because, you know, that begs the question of what other stuff Venom knows. Like, there are other Venoms who have bonds with other Eddie Brocks. Does he know about that? Why wouldn't he, right? You could really drive yourself nuts thinking about all the things that are implied by this revelation. But for now, it's just a throwaway line to bullshit a reason for him to get sent to the MCU. And like I said, it doesn't really matter what the rules of this spell were, since none of these movies care at all to maintain consistency with it. Hell, even No Way Home doesn't actually follow its own rules about it. But still, that's what they went with, and it's definitely gonna be worth keeping in mind going into Venom 3. So don't forget it. 2 out of 10, moving on.
What do you got, 6 months? It's too bad. We're not gonna have that last dance together.
Do you guys think Sam Raimi watched this movie in theaters and felt like Oppenheimer, watching Eddie sadly remember all the good times he had with Venom at the end while it plays a montage of past scenes to the song Memories by Maroon 5? Do you think he felt partially responsible for allowing that to happen? I know I would. I'm not kidding, by the way. That really happens. If it wasn't clear by the last, hour of content here, yeah, big spoiler alert, Venom dies in this movie. It's real sad, I know. And I'm gonna have some things to say about how that's handled and what that means for the story going forward, both in-universe and from a meta standpoint. I mean, assuming there is a going forward. But to start off, though, I guess we gotta address the No Way Home in the room here, since, you know, that's where the last movie left off, with Venom and Eddie getting teleported to Tom Holland's world. It's absolutely hilarious to me how the people working on No Way Home took one look at that and just said, fuck no. Because Venom and Eddie had absolutely no involvement in the plot. He shows up only in the post-credit scene of that movie just to show him getting sent back to his own universe. And you could honestly have just skipped this post-credit scene anyway, because the same scene happens at the beginning of Venom 3. The only extra piece of information you would get by watching the scene in No Way Home is that a small piece of Venom gets left behind in that universe for some reason, and I'm sure that'll end up being relevant to the Tom Holland films, because we all know how good those movies are at following up on plot lines set up in post-credit scenes. Come to think of it, I guess that little piece of Venom might come into play in order to bring him back to life if they ever decide to make another one of these because of the whole multiverse spanning hive mind or something. I mean, they already undid a heroic sacrifice from Venom before, why not do it again, right? What the hell are consequences? And they pretty much have to bring Venom back if they plan to follow up the Null storyline because, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself here. This movie introduces a new big bad type character named Null, who's basically this god creature who predates time itself.
He's older than the universe.
Long before time had a name, the first Spinjitzu master.
He created the symbiotes, and he's super big and bad and evil, and he wants to destroy everything, I guess. Basically, just imagine the Dark Elves from that Thor movie no one remembers, but somehow even less cool. The trailers heavily suggested that he would, be the villain of this movie, but instead what happens is he shows up at the beginning and he's like, "Go, my pretties, bring me that girl and her slippers!" And then these animal henchmen things are the main antagonist of the film. Null gets mentioned here and there as this big scary guy that you don't want to fuck with, and then by the end of the movie, nothing changes. He's still out there and he's still a-coming. Ooh. And I don't imagine there's anyone out there who's really that invested in how all this plays out, but for the 5 or 6 of you who are, I doubt you're gonna be satisfied if Null was ultimately defeated by anyone other than Venom, right? He's the symbiote god. He actually has some form of connection with him. It just wouldn't mean anything if Null gets killed by fucking Morbius. So if they're gonna do a follow-up to this, then Venom's gotta come back. But whatever, Venom is dead. For now. So what does this Null guy want anyhow? Well, the film establishes a very interesting thing here. Apparently at some point, the symbiotes realized he was bad news and locked him away in the Void, and the only way for him to get out is through this thing called the Codex. It serves as a key to something, I don't really know. His minions have these portals that allow them to leave the Void whenever they want, so I don't know why he can't just also do that. It looks like there's some black goo that's keeping him restrained to this chair. I'm assuming that's some kind of symbiote residue or something, and apparently that's enough to keep him tied up there. Doesn't seem like he's all that powerful and scary if that's enough to hold him, but whatever. The reason he's after Venom specifically is that apparently a codex can only be created when a host dies and comes back to life thanks to the symbiote they're bonded with resurrecting them, which is what happened during the final fight in Venom 1. So now one of Null's creatures starts tracking Eddie, but it's only really able to see him when the codex is activated, and that only happens when he's in full Venom form. Already, I have a couple of logistical questions here. I guess I'll start with the smaller issues. So Eddie goes full Venom a lot of times between when he died and now. And, we've never seen these creatures until now, so what gives? These portals seem to give the creatures instantaneous transportation to wherever they want to go, so it's not like it had to spend time flying to Earth or something after the Codex was first activated. The only thing I can think of to make this make sense is if the creature still needs to be on the same planet as Venom in order to start tracking him effectively. But if that's the case, then that would have to mean establishing that Null knew that a Codex existed, but not which planet it was on, and that makes everything so much worse. Because I don't know if you know this, but space is big. Really big. You just won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. And apparently all 3 of these movies take place in the span of 1 year from when Eddie gets the symbiote to now.
A year ago when you stole my life.
We've been together for a whole year.
A year too long.
So if you're telling me that this creature had all of space to comb through when looking for which planet the Codex was on and managed to narrow it all the way down to Earth in 1 year? Sorry, no, I don't believe you. But also, I told you guys to keep in mind that the last movie established that the symbiote hive mind is connected across multiple universes. So that raises the question, if the symbiotes transcend the multiverse and their creator is a god who lives outside of space and time, then wouldn't he have dominion across infinite universes? And you're telling me there hasn't been a single codex ever created until now by any other symbiotes and their hosts? That seems unlikely. Oh, come on, Sheev, you're being unfair. There's nothing to suggest this is the first codex that was ever created.
At last, a codex is being created.
Unless we're saying there have been other codexes in the past, but all of them have been rendered inaccessible to Null for one reason or the other, this line implies to me that Eddie and Venom were the first one. Maybe other codexes have existed that Null just didn't know about, but then I'm gonna start to question question just how all-seeing and all-powerful this guy really is, and how he even knows about this codex if he apparently doesn't have ways of just sensing that shit. So we're really not off to a great start, seeing as the premise of this story is built entirely on multiple plot holes, one of which fundamentally undermines world building on a cosmic scale. But hey, what else is new? And if you're like me, you're probably thinking, well, why don't Venom and Eddie just separate? They keep talking to each other like the only way to deal with this is if one of them dies to destroy the codex. But if the codex is only active so long as they're in full Venom form, just don't do that. Have Venom go find another host and just go their separate ways. You'd still have these creatures running around trying to find it, but we're shown multiple times that when the codex isn't active, they're basically just blindly flailing in no particular direction, not hurting anyone. So I don't know, that seems like the safest option. What are Eddie and Venom even trying to do in this movie? Well, if you'll remember, they were on the run from the authorities and fled to Mexico, and now they've come to find out that Detective Mulligan is supposedly dead, and Eddie is being pinned for that. Not really sure why he is, considering Mulligan's body would have been found at a church with the bodies of two psychopaths, one of which was a notorious serial killer and the other was someone with a personal vendetta against Mulligan for shooting her eye out, but alright, add that to the list of crimes Eddie's wanted for, I guess. So Eddie decides he doesn't want to spend the rest of his life hiding out in Mexico, which I find really strange, frankly. Like, why did it take you so long to decide that? And why the fuck did you flee to Mexico at all if you're not willing to live down there? And where the fuck else do you think you can safely go? Well, we get an answer to that last question.
That could work.
Eddie tells Venom that there's a judge in New York that ran him out of state, which lines up with something that was said in Venom 1, to be fair.
But we don't want a repeat of the Daily Globe incident.
Ow, really? Incident? It's not an incident.
Maybe you were run out of New York.
But apparently Eddie has a bunch of dirt on this judge and now has it in mind that he's gonna blackmail him into... I don't really know what. Like, what the hell is one judge gonna do to exonerate you from your laundry list of federal crimes?
I've always wanted to see the Statue of Liberty.
Oh, well, that settles it then. The big quest that gets these characters moving is that Eddie and Venom really don't want to live in Mexico, and I mean, I don't know, the Statue of Liberty seems cool, I guess. This is a subtle reference to the fact that they were in fact not invited to participate in the Statue of Liberty fight in No Way Home. So here's a simple rewrite that almost feels like a no-brainer. Have the driving conflict be Eddie and Venom running from the law while trying to find someone else that Venom is naturally compatible with. Have that be the quest of the movie. Since good hosts are continually established to be rare and hard to find, it wouldn't be a problem they could easily fix, but it would be something that's entirely possible for them to do, and it would suddenly put an expiration date on their time together. So now Eddie, who's viewed Venom as this burden that completely ruined his life, can start to realize how much he's actually grown to care about the guy now that he knows it isn't going to last much longer. Also, I should mention that the B-plot of this film is basically that the government guys chasing Eddie and Venom are working with a top-secret alien research site underneath Area 51, which for some reason is being decommissioned. Apparently it's being shut down because it's controversial, but I'm assuming the real site is still going to continue existing, right? Seeing as they're in the middle of studying a bunch of alien life forms and all. But that brings me to the main point of why I brought this up. It turns out that the US government has gotten their hands on another batch of symbiotes, and not just holdovers from the Life Foundation like you might be thinking. This is a separate set of symbiotes who also happen to be near enough to Earth to crash land there. You may think it's a long way down the road to the chemist, but that's just peanuts to space. Detective Mulligan is also here. Turns out he didn't actually die, but he was basically on the brink of death, and so they had him rushed to this facility and bonded him with a symbiote to save his life. Yep, turns out he's yet another person in Eddie's life who's compatible, but criticizing that would be kind of redundant at this point, considering basically everyone at this lab ends up bonding with one later, and the implication is that they're all going to be completely fine, so whatever. Who cares anymore? Something I find even weirder is that at the end of Venom 2, we see a shot of Mulligan where his eyes turn blue, and I had absolutely no idea what that was supposed to mean. Did he also have superpowers independent from the rest of the characters, and those were just lying dormant until now for some reason? What's going on? And, well, neither of these films really explain that, so I had to do my own research, and apparently this was meant to hint that he was now bonded with his own symbiote named Toxin, who, according to the comics, was actually birthed by Carnage. So I guess we're saying some piece of Carnage got into Mulligan and became this new symbiote? I don't know. You know, nobody else's eyes glowed when they bonded with their symbiotes, but what do I know? The third movie seems to have decided better about this whole thing and just retconned that away, because while we do get this one line here,
his other symbiote left him for dead.
There's no mention about this ever again. I guess what we're saying is he bonded with a symbiote through nebulous means while he lay dying, and then that garnered interest in him from these people at Area 51, so they had him rushed over here, and then that symbiote just fucked off for some reason, and they bonded him with another one at their facility. Did I get that right? And does that mean this green symbiote here is supposed to be Toxin? It doesn't really matter, I guess, because he fucking dies immediately as soon as the fighting starts, and he doesn't really do anything other than provide helpful exposition to the scientist characters for the rest of the movie. Anyway, these government agents want to bring Venom in because, well, he's another symbiote, obviously, but also, once they find out about the Codex from Toxin, Mordo wants to kill him to protect the Earth. So Eddie and Venom really need to keep their heads down, because the second shit hits the fan, they have a bunch of soldiers and a giant alien monster breathing down their necks. And, you know, that's kind of a neat idea, right? You give the main characters a challenge by throwing out the rule book, so to speak. They're so used to getting through anything by just venoming out whenever the going gets tough, so what if they're no longer allowed to do that without attracting the attention of Null's minions, forcing them to deal with combat situations in more unique ways? That could generate some pretty creative action scenes and showcase the desperation in moments where Eddie does go full Venom because he has no other choice. Well, I say all that, but you're never gonna guess how they end up getting captured by the government, guys. I'm getting all tingly inside just thinking about what good writing this is. So, Venom and Eddie hit Vegas so they can go gambling, and who should they run into other than Mrs. fucking Chen? It's not like they called her or one of their mutual friends or something and asked her to meet them there. She just decided to go to Vegas and into the exact same casino as Eddie, right at the same time as him, because why not? And it's not lost on me, by the way, that she's a confirmed compatible host for Venom, which means the solution to their problems has just presented itself and neither of them are even thinking about taking it. But it's funny I should mention that little problem, because Venom seems to have forgotten it entirely. That's the only way I can explain what he does next. Mrs. Chen wants to dance with Venom, and she turns on a remix of Dancing Queen, and they start dancing. Venom just forgot he's not supposed to Venom out, because I guess the people writing this movie kind of realized none of this shit matters anymore and decided, fuck it. And honestly, I respect that. Might as well, right? You could have forced Eddie to Venom out by having the government close in on him, and then that would cause the creature to find them, and, you know, that would follow basic cause and effect. But why even fucking bother with all that? This is a fucking clown movie. Venom the Last Dance borrowed my car and rammed it into a fucking orphanage. So exactly what you'd expect happens. The creature attacks, the government shows up because they have instant teleportation, I guess, and Eddie and Venom get separated. Mordo wants to just eliminate Eddie so as to destroy the Codex, and he already has permission by his superiors to take unilateral control of this entire program. But for some reason, his men aren't ordered to just execute him on sight. Mordo has no problem killing Eddie himself like it's nothing just a few minutes later. So I don't really see why not. But it's a good thing he didn't, otherwise Venom wouldn't have been able to save him through means of absolute bullshit. One of the scientists breaks Venom out and bonds with him, and then when Eddie gets shot, he's able to quickly jump in and heal him. Because, sure, why not? Also, the creature is here because it tracked them back to the base. Things are just sort of happening now, so we may as well find some way to just wrap this all up. But the last thing we need to go over before we can talk about this final battle is there's this family of hippies that they introduce who give Eddie and Venom a ride at one point, and their whole deal is they want to go visit Area 51 before it gets decommissioned and maybe even spot an alien. Ooh. And right around now is when they finally get there, and one of them finds a spot where the fence is broken, so they just kind of let themselves in. I understand that this place is shutting down in a few days, but no. Even in real life, there's no way a group of civilians is just breaking into Area 51 and sneaking around without getting caught, but especially not one that objectively has aliens, like, right underneath where they're standing. They managed to climb a fucking guard tower without anyone catching them, and that's where they are when all the aliens bust free and the big fight happens, putting them all in danger. And now that we've properly set the stage, we can finally talk about the final battle. You know, this is actually live footage of me dragging Jolly into watching this with me right after we finished Venom 2. There's a sort of Shazam 2 moment here where Eddie goes up to the watchtower to rescue the family, and then he spends valuable time talking to the kid and showing off his friendly alien parasite while the monster is right down there fighting off a bunch of symbiotes, who, by the way, are doing all they can just to hold the thing off so that Venom can get out of there in the Codex along with him. But Sure. Yeah, there's no rush, yeah. Then, because of this, the family is still up on the watchtower when an explosion happens that causes it to lose its structural integrity, and they almost die. Thankfully, though, these symbiotes are weirdly altruistic. Like, I get them fighting because they're trying to protect themselves and fellow brethren from Null, but I guess this particular batch of symbiotes really just care about protecting human life. That whole imprisoning and experimenting on them, that's water under the bridge as far as they're concerned. And besides, the scientists were nice to them. So something I want you guys to take note of is just how hard it's been shown to take one of these creatures out across the film. They're pretty fucking OP. This one has given Venom a real run for his money, and now there are multiple symbiotes fighting it, and it's going through them like it's nothing. It can basically suck them into its maw and shred them like a wood chipper, and this battle introduces us to the fact that it can apparently also do this. Which you'd think would just be kind of game over, right? Like, there's really not much any of the symbiotes can do against that, so why not just constantly do it? These things are also practically indestructible. Like, early on in the film, it gets sucked into an airplane turbine and chopped into pieces, and it just regenerates like dirge. The plane was fine, by the way. They just never addressed that again. Then here in the final battle, Mordo fucking explodes it with a bazooka, and it reforms from that too. And now I'm starting to wonder about the stakes. Like, if one of these things is enough to cause this much trouble to a whole band of symbiotes, and Null has an army of them, then I'm not really sure what our protagonists are realistically supposed to do to stop him. And even if they ever do follow this up and have Venom or some other superhero take down Null, I somehow get the sense that it's not going to feel earned. Like, whatever solution they come up with is going to be some kind of cop-out. Then again, I say that, but it kind of already feels like that, because this thing calls a bunch of other creatures into the battle, and at that point you think it's basically over, right? Like, they had enough trouble with just one, and now that problem is exponentially multiplied. But the way Venom defeats them is by wrapping himself around them and forcing them into the acid destroying chamber, which they have. Acid works on these things, apparently. Good to know. But it also works on Venom, and so this is the big heroic sacrifice I was telling you guys about earlier. I don't really know why none of the creatures use their sound wave power to make Venom lose his hold on them, and of course the Codex is destroyed along with him, which means, I guess, Null's trapped forever, right? Apparently these things rarely ever come about, and he's been imprisoned for billions of years, so unless Venom actually does get brought back or some other symbiote makes another Codex, and why would any of them do that? I don't really see how he's all that much of a threat now. The end of this movie really wants to have a fine, I'll do it myself kind of vibe, but at least Thanos actually had the capacity to leave his bedroom whenever he wanted. So that's the end of the movie. Eddie wakes up in a hospital room in New York, and some military officer tells him his criminal record has been expunged, and he's free to go about his life however he pleases, as long as he never tells anyone about the aliens. Like I said at the beginning of this review, he starts reminiscing on all the good times he shared with Venom, and we flash back to some of the shit that happened in the other films. Aww. Remember that time Venom told Eddie he was just gonna fucking murder everyone and do whatever he wanted, and that Eddie was just gonna be helplessly along for the ride? Good times. Man, I'm gonna miss you, buddy.
I won't forget you, buddy.
Oh, and he got to see the Statue of Liberty. It's bittersweet because they were gonna do that together, Venom is dead, and now because he won't get to, but Eddie will. 2 out of 10, about as bad as Venom 2. So that was the Venom trilogy. Man, what a ride. We laughed, we cried. I know I learned a lot. Honestly, I don't know what I was expecting out of these movies, but somehow it wasn't this. I only watched them like one time in theaters. I think I watched the first one a second time because I was about to go see Carnage. I mainly remembered them just being mediocre, inoffensive slop, but I was definitely wrong. These are the exact right kind of funny bad that makes it fun to make videos about them, and I had a blast writing up this script. But I bet the next part's gonna be even more fun. We got Morbius and Madam Web. I've been wanting to do a video about Madam Web since it came out, but could just never find the time to properly devote to it. And if you're going to talk about that movie, you can't half-ass it. You got to do it right. But that's all I've got for you this time. Big thanks to Southpaw for editing this video. He's edited for me before, so you should know the drill by now. Link to his channel down in the description. Go check him out. Give him some love. Tell him Papa Sheev sent ya. Join the Discord server. Become a channel member so you can access my videos 2 days ahead of everyone else. And, be kind and good and loving, and I love all of you. Goodbye.